All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so glad you are here for our ninth annual Revival Lost Southern Voices. And our panel now is going to be what we see when we read children's books. And our moderator today is Pearl McHaney. Pearl is the co founder of Revival Lost Southern Voices, along with Andy Rogers, who is also here today. Thank you, Andy. And Pearl is the Kenneth M. England Professor of Southern Literature Emerita at Georgia State University. She's the editor of Occasions, Selected Writings by, you can guess, Eudora Welty, and the author of Eudora Welty is Photographer. She is the founding editor of Eudora Welty Review and the author of A Tyrannous Eye, Eudora Welty's Nonfiction and Photography. Pearl is a founding member of the Newbery Sisters Reading Project, which she will be talking about today. And I see some of them in the audience. Welcome. Yes, okay. Yes. And I would also like to invite you to, after the talk today, if you'd like to go up to the fourth floor gallery, there is a art installation of children's book illustrators. Upstairs, you can take the elevator on the right and just go to the fourth floor and take a look around. So without any further ado, we will continue with our panel. I'll give it to Pearl. Thank you.
Actually came about because of that exhibit upstairs. So please do go and look at that exhibit. The Society for the Writers of Children's, the Society of, no, I'm going to get it. The children's book writers and illustrators are meeting here next week, and the exhibit is upstairs about some of the illustrations that wonderful people have done. They're just really astounding, and you get to see them as pieces of art and then see how they are transformed onto the page of a book that can be shared with others. So I thought of my dear friends, Lynn Cullen, who has been on this stage many times for her books, and Carmen Agra Deedy, to be able to present about the books and the illustrators and their work together. And I haven't given them very many instructions, but I'm going to introduce Lynn first. So it's a kind of a free-for-all, kind of like what Carmen is used to if she has children in the audience. So Lynn is actually now a historical fiction author of world-renowned books. Her latest one that you can buy out front is The Woman with the Cure. And, oh my gosh, I have these all mixed up. Okay, Woman with the Cure, which is about the 1940s and 50s. The woman who really helped to solve polio and the vaccinations for polio. Her new book that's coming out in the spring is When We Were Brilliant, story of Marilyn Monroe. I think you know of her. And the photographer Eve Arnold and their relationship together. So that'll be in the spring. But as far as children's books go, these are the really lost voices in Lynn's world and in my book world also, starting with The Mightiest Heart, Moi and Marie Antoinette, Dear Mr. Washington, and Scraggly Hair, Little Scraggly Hair, the dog on Noah's Ark. And these are all out of print. So you go to your local used bookstore and buy them. Don't take these. You can look at them, but don't take them. I know. I mean, that's great. All right, so while we're thinking about Lynn, let's let Lynn go ahead, and then I'll introduce Carmen after.
So I just going to tell you about my children's books, right? And my former life as a children's book writer, which I came by because I always knew I was going to be a writer. My sister here, Arlene, can attest to that. I've been writing ever since I could put pen to paper, and even before that. And I was trying to figure out how I could, you know, what kind of writing to do when I grew up. You probably wanted to be a writer too, always. No, you were a nurse for a while, weren't you?
I taught Montessori for 3 years. Was inoculated the little people. I thought I loved them, but I had them at home. I had them at work, and but I, you know, I thought I can't do it.
Oh
But
no,
then I ended up with
we could have a conversation.
like tens of, well, hundreds of thousands of 3 years. They just behind you.
So anyhow, see, I'm gonna get lost talking to Carmen. We haven't seen each other for ages, and and okay, I will. But you know, in the children's world, there's a circuit which I haven't been part of for years, um, because I've been doing adult books, which doesn't that sound X-rated? I've been doing adult books. Anyhow, so I needed to find a way to write. I always knew I was going to write, and I had 3 kids in 4.5 years' time. So is when I went to the school library for my oldest daughter, her kindergarten year. That was, of course, the place I would naturally volunteer for as a parent. And I saw middle grade novels and was fascinated by that. I hadn't thought about them since I was a kid, but like by Betsy Byers, um, Gary Paulson, gosh, there's some more from back then. Anyhow, I'll move on. So and we're from the same world, you know. Yes. So anyhow, um, I saw these middle grade novels and I read them and I thought I want to write those. That's how I'll get into writing. Plus, you know, I had kids at home and they were my guinea pigs. I'm going to keep whipping that book out. But anyhow, I had the kids, and so I found my way in the children's book. And the nice thing is, I'm sitting here with someone who was very important. She married a man who was my only writing instructor. I'm an English major, and I had all the instruction from that. But I had no writing courses, so I took a few at Georgia State. And Tom McHaney, Pearl's husband, was my instructor. And he one thing he told me is, after you get serious about writing, it's 7 years usually for people to get published. And I remember thinking, oh, I'll beat that because I'm a writer. Well, it was 7 years, and I realize now how very lucky I was after 7 years to get published. It's not easy finding your way. But I started out with middle grade novels, but after I'd done several of those, I looked at picture books. I kind of went backward. My kids were aging. They were middle grade and up, but I was so fascinated by picture books and legends, and I so for the mightiest heart. It's thank you. Um, anyhow, I see one of my very early speeches that I gave to the Welsh Society of Georgia, because this takes place, or this is about a Welsh legend. And I got the idea, as I recall by reading this, by looking at it. I was looking at this old book that I got at the library, different branch, but this is where I did all my research early on. And I was looking through this old book called Curious Myths of the Middle Ages. Is by Sabine Baring Gould, who I'd find out was renowned for folklore. And he had in this flowery little tale, because it was from the mid 1800s, about Gellert, the faithful dog. And the thing about Gellert, according to Baring Gould, excuse me, um, the Gellert was the dog of the Prince of Wales, who made him stay home to watch his baby son when he went hunting. And when he got back from hunting, he found his son's cradle bloodied. They made a big deal of the blood and emptied, and nearby Gellert with blood on his paws and jaws. And instantly, the Prince of Wales jumped to the conclusion that Gellert had killed his son. So he killed the dog. And then afterward, he saw that his son was lying under his cradle, safe, that Gellert had saved him. And he also had saw a nearby wolf. anyhow, this is the story, and it was kind of gruesome, but there goes the book. Anyhow, I loved that it was. Oh, thanks. I'll be grabbing that. Anyhow, I loved that it was about misunderstanding someone who really was good. And so I didn't want to have the dog die, for one, especially for a children's book. It was bad enough. Once this book was done and I went to schools, that's what we used to do, is go to schools. And I'd look out and there'd be kids crying when I read the book, and teachers every single time. And that was with the dog living. But so I was not going to kill that dog. But and I had a different message that I figured out with that, is that the mightiest hearts can be found in the weakest vessel. And anyhow, that I think that's what made the teachers cry. And interestingly, just a side note, this most recent book I wrote, The Woman with the Cure, that is its message too, that the mightiest heart is in the weakest vessel. And it's funny, after, I don't know, this speech is from 1999, so it's a long time ago that I was writing this, and it came back. It's such an important message to me. So as far as the illustrator, because that's why we're really here for this book, her name is Laurel Long, and my editor found her. This is her first picture book, and she only did one or two after this, because she is a fine artist. She's an amazing artist, actually, and she found that really it was too much work for her time, like what she got paid. But each of these spreads, single painting. What happened was, I think you knew your illustrators pretty well since it was, yeah. Since there's a big separation usually, that if you have some of the New York publishers, they don't really encourage you to recommend the illustrator or have anything to do with them, period. And I didn't. Like for Laurel Long, they sent me her sketches to see if I had any comments. I only had one. I remember just thinking, these are amazing. I had one where I just felt, oh, what an authority. She had castles that had peaks on them. And if you go to Wales, which I did, I'm so crazy with even my children's book, the history, I had to go to where Gellert is supposed to have lived, in a town called Bed Gellert, which means grave of Gellert. Anyhow, I was even there doing the research, and saw that the castles in the north of Wales were straight, like they're square, and definitely didn't have a peak to them. So she had these like Disney kind of looking castles, and I said, oh, there's no spire to them. And it's ludicrous because her work was so fascinating and wonderful. And so anyhow, I had to meet her after we were done, which I was not encouraged to do. And she did this work when she lived in Northern California, but she lived for a short time in Macon, Georgia. Her husband took a job on the paper there. He was the managing editor, and I think she only lived there 1 year. But during that 1 year, I made a pilgrimage to meet her and see her work. And she was a little scared because this is not how it goes. Like I said, they keep us apart. And I remember when I went to the door, she kind of looked me over and make sure I wasn't too crazy, but she let me in to her studio. And so she showed me, as I begin to show you, each one of these paintings is a painting done in oil. And she took a month on each one. That was another thing that made it so she couldn't afford to do this. She took a month on each spread. And if you look at them, they are just meticulous. They're just amazing. And so I said, who inspired you? Like where do you get your art for this? And she said, oh, I love Gerard David. And let's see if I can find one that really, you cannot see this very well probably from the back, but if you look at that, and after I heard she loved Gerard David, I went, I had not only got a book um, and marked it up, and in fact, I use this for other books, but I had to go to Belgium and the Netherlands just to learn about him and, see his work in museums. But if you look, her work looks very, very much. You can see how she was very inspired. She also said the like the little baby was her daughter, and she had her poodle lying down to show. Like I have the wolf dead here. Find that. Anyhow, this dead wolf was actually her right here. She had her poodle lie down, but so this wolf is actually a poodle. I don't know if you can see it. So the artist has to make their way. They do some fictionalizing as well. But the fun thing about Gerard David, it led me into my adult books. Just everything that you do as a writer is just like another step along the way in your journey. It's so fascinating. I feel so lucky to have this life. But so I learned about Gerard David, and I got very interested in Northern Renaissance writers, which after a while led me to Rembrandt as a Northern European artist. And my first adult book, when I finally did adult books, was I Am Rembrandt's Daughter. Actually, that's classified as a young adult, but I wrote it as an adult book. So, my picture books led to my adult books. And then after Rembrandt's Daughter, I wrote about the first woman painter of the Renaissance, Sofonisba Anguissola. And to understand her, I went back to the art of Gerard David and Northern Renaissance and just different Renaissance painters. But it all flowed from going to meet my illustrator, which again was almost taboo. It was not encouraged for me to do, and I'm so glad I did.
Long be sent. Would she have the page? Would she have your text broken down by pages, or would it just be one long document and she decided what she wanted to paint for that, do you think?
I'm trying to remember, because I used to know this, but it's been so long. I think that the editor already broke it out, I think. You have hands-on experience with that.
Not
Yes.
right now. Not right now.
Oh, okay. So I think that my editor broke it down, but I'm not sure. Maybe I'm going to guess that the
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to ask her questions, just so you know. I know, but she wanted to hand it to me, and I didn't want to embarrass her by telling her. But thank you very much. Those are called page breaks, and generally the author will not put them in, but you may submit them with first the complete manuscript and then also with the page.
So would it be the editor who broke it down
Yeah.
for illustrator?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely did not. No, and so maybe a way of answering yours is I never did anything other than submit a whole manuscript, which in the case of The Mightiest Heart was long for children's books. But thanks. So any other question along that line?
Whether it be the children's books or the adult books, what you have said in the past that you had a question that you were seeking to answer through the story. Do you remember saying?
Do I look a little blank? Yeah, but that is the
For
truth.
example, like with Rembrandt's daughter. Tell what were you seeking to discover?
Okay, well, Rembrandt's daughter, her memory is amazing. She's had me at many of her book clubs and other, when she taught at Georgia State, the children's literature classes, she had me there. And you remember stuff about me that I have totally forgotten. But That's why she's perfect. Anyhow, so let's see what the question. The question for I Am Rembrandt's Daughter is, so here's Rembrandt, and I got to know him very well, and I decided I have to write about him. But this is always how it is for me. I find a subject that I am so interested in, but I always think, what about the women? What about the women in this circumstance? So here's Rembrandt. He had a common law wife and a daughter and his son from his first marriage. His first wife died, and he was known to paint everything. He painted beggars on the street. He painted neighbors. He painted dogs peeing. He painted everything. One thing he did not paint was his daughter Cornelia. And I answered with this book what that was about. And in fact found that he did paint about her, or paint her. So there's always that quest that I'm on. And I feel like a bit of a detective because, I have these questions that I have to figure out. And also, when I find all these bits of history and art or whatever, how they all fit together, it's fun. It's like doing a puzzle. Writing a book is like doing a puzzle.
Is it moi and Marie
Moi,
Antoinette?
yeah.
Yes, I can't remember which one.
Yeah,
was
or
which.
as a lot of kids pronounce it, Moy and Marie Antoinette. Yeah.
Can you
I'm
talk a
with
little
you.
bit about that? Because those illustrations are so different. Were you disappointed? Like, wait, where's all the regalness that I saw with Mightiest Heart? And here, this is much more, I don't know, it's a different style entirely.
Yeah, if you look at all my books, they're totally different. Different. The stories are different, and I don't have the same illustrator twice. Boy, I would have loved to have Laurel along again, but uh, again, she got out of it because it just wasn't right for her. Her work was too painstaking for children's books. Um, but let's see, which you went about Amy Young and Moi. And I saw the paintings for that. I never had any conversation with Amy Young. I always thank them in the end. But if I have anything to say, it goes through the editor, which is a little weird, but that's how it works. And there's a reason for it though, and I'm glad for this reason. They have their own vision. When I wrote The Mightiest Heart, I had no idea how it would look, but the editor assigns it to somebody. The editor has an idea of their style. They're thinking about it, but I'm so glad not to have any uh, to encroach at all on my editors, or excuse me, on the illustrators, because it's their own book in their way, and I didn't want to encroach on that. So that makes sense because there's some writers who really have this vision and they really want to have things look a certain way, but I was happy for them to have their vision. Sure. And can I? Oh, so tell me. Sorry, Pearl, I'm taking your job. How does it work for you? Because I know it's totally different. Are Have you done books beyond Peachtree a lot? To name a couple.
It's lovely to be here with you today, especially such fine company. Um, please repeat the question.
Okay. So your experience is totally different than mine.
Okay, so um, I'm just going to talk a little bit about these two then, and then
Okay.
that answer will be embedded
Okay.
in this.
Okay.
If not, you all will remind me.
Oh,
Oh, they don't care.
we're having fun here.
who Thomas Gonzalez moved from corporate America, working for Coca-Cola, to illustrating children's books. And we can talk a little bit about how he's not lost, but he is another important Southern voice, I think. Currently, and you can buy many of Carmen's books out in the book display, which is how we thank them for presenting to us today. And her most recent one, it comes from her own life story again, and it's called The Peanut Man. So you'll definitely want to get that one. Go.
All right, thank you. I'll begin with Tom, and I'm blessed are the brief. So Tom Gonzalez was the illustrator of this book. Now, this book came after. The Library Dragon preceded it, so I'm not doing them chronologically. But purposely, I'd like to begin with this one. That interesting question about the collaboration between illustrator and author, and whether the reasons for it, or the reasons to negate that relationship. It is absolutely true that generally publishers do not like authors and illustrators to collaborate or even really to connect very much, even through email, because they are protecting wisely the world of the illustrator. So as you so beautifully put it, they have their own vision, and authors, we can be a little pushy. I don't like that. That doesn't look, so there are many, I've been an editor for 12 years, and I can tell you there are lots of ways to do this. One is, which is very accepted, and you probably can say yes or no, I'm going to tell you. Have you ever made illustration notes?
No.
Have you included them? Okay. No. Because many of the publishers I've worked with will encourage that. So, and there are times when they're critical. For example, please do not show the wine rhymer in this picture on this spread, because it is going to be a surprise in the next spread. And if you show it now, it's going to interrupt the flow of the story. Does that make sense? So there are times when it is absolutely not just permissible, but essential that the author insert certain, I don't want to say instructions, but comments. Then there are certain publishers. Margaret Quinlan at Peachtree was certainly one that allowed a good bit of communication, even collaboration. So much so that we had editorial meetings as the books progressed with several books that I worked with. They're all with different authors, where we met at the publishers at the round table, and it would last for 3 or 4 hours. So how did that happen? The author comes up with the idea. Do you guys want to hear this part, this process part? Okay. So you know this part. The author comes up with the idea. You present it to either your agent, or if you have a publisher that you have an intimate relationship with, directly to them. Once the publisher decides they want your book, they give you a contract. You go out and celebrate. You either go to Applebee's or you go to a 5-star. It depends on what your particular situation is. And most of us go to Waffle House. But it's very exciting. You write and rewrite and revise and revise. My experience, personal experience, is that it will take me, at this point in my life, after 30-some years, I will turn in the 7th draft of a first draft. They're not even going to look at it till I've written it over 6 or 7 times. And then the process will begin again, and we could have altogether, beginning with my original 7, another 10 or 15 on top of that. Once those revisions have set the story, meaning the changes are not going to be to the arc of the story. In other words, nothing is going to change so drastically that the illustrator would have to redraw or repaint, whatever. It goes to the illustrator. The illustrator then works for the art director, because the author would have been working with the editor. They go through a similar process. They either submit pencil, or they do dummy books, where they get an actual sort of a fake book they'll put together and staple, and they'll sketch out their book. You get to see that as the illustrator. Did you get to see the dummy book or the initial drawings? Yes.
Yeah.
So we do get to see those. And we can't come, like you said, it was the wrong, it was, no, not parapet. The wrong, yes. And in this wonderful book, and I do want to say a few things about this, because Tom was so fantastic. We do love our illustrators, don't we?
Yes, they're amazing.
Oy. Before I show you this, let me tell you that Tom Gonzalez and I both came as refugee children and were playmates. Very few people know that. Do you want to know how we got together for this book?
Yeah.
My mother, his mother, at a funeral. How Cuban and Southern. We were ancestors, just like you guys, all right? So my mother is at a funeral. I wasn't able to go. I was not forgiven for a very long time. But the lady in question was already nearly 100, and I had said goodbye to her the previous year, and enough said. My mother calls me. Carmita, everyone missed you at the funeral. I'm like, I know, Ma, I'm really sorry. You know I had to work, and I could, yes. Well, listen, I saw Tom Gonzalez's mother, Anita. I said, oh, how are they doing? They're doing great. So we did a little business. Guys, I'm not making this is exactly you. Yes, you did, didn't you? All right. And, oh, merciful heavens! I said, what kind of business? Thinking they're starting up a fruit stand. I mean, what could possibly? Well, I told Anita, see, that you were writing the little books. I said, thanks, mommy. No, I'm not insulting you, but the little books for the little children, and that you had a book about some cows. And she said, my Tom, he does the art for Coca-Cola. He's very important. And he draws the pictures. I said, what do you mean? I mean, he's going to do your book. I talked to Anna. She's going to call him tonight. I thought, oh my God. I hadn't seen Tom since we were kids. Number one. Number two, he had to be as mortified as I. Number three, he might not want to do my little book. And I didn't know what his art was like. He was in the corporate world. I had no idea. So we agreed because we had Cuban mothers and there was no argument to be brooked. We met for lunch and we've talked about it since then. We both sort of approached with that kind of like, the fighter stance. Not sure. And it was wonderful. We had the most wonderful meal. I gave him the manuscript and I said, listen, you're completely off the hook. If you hate this thing, don't worry about it. And that manuscript had already gone through such a soulful journey itself. It had gone to Kimeli, the Maasai in question, whom I had met and who read the manuscript and eventually, he was wonderful. He decided he was okay with having me tell his story because he wasn't going to tell it himself. That was my question to him. I won't write this if you're going to tell this story. And so he said, read it to me. So that had happened before I met Tom. And then Tom said, I'm going to do it. Back to the castle. These 2-page spreads. See the cattle there. Maasai elders meeting. Each of these spreads, most art is shot down. It gives a detail that might not be conveyed simply shooting the art at 100%. So it is shot down, and it depends. It could be up to 30%, it could be 15%. This is when you don't know the story. Then all you need to know is our ambassador was on his way to visit the Maasai people at the Mara Reserve, and he was met with this extraordinary. So these huge pictures would take him a very long time. I never did ask him how long, but I know that it took a year and a half for them all to be completed because there were backs and forth. These cows were the wrong cows. The original spread, that enormous painting, had the wrong cows. Those were not the cows that particular tribe herded. They shepherded. Shepherded is the wrong word, but herded. And so he had to do the entire thing again. And so for most of us who work in this work for children, it really is a labor of love. We make about $1 a book on a hardback, pennies on a paperback. We love the work. And I didn't know you loved folklore as much as you do. Oh, we talk later. So this book took a very long time. It ended up being a New York Times bestseller for 2 weeks. Still counts, evidently.
Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Great.
Working with Tom was really amazing, and it made our mothers so happy. And then to this one because I'm trying to move along because I know you'll have questions for us. This is a sad one to talk about for me, and for those of you who knew Mike. Michael White was such a lovely person, and so I would like to tell you how I met him, and then just a little bit about our collaboration. And by the way, with both of them, because we had previous knowledge of one another, we really did collaborate, and I loved their input, and it was I thought incredibly useful for us to work together. And I have thoughts on that, by the way. When Mike and I met, we were here at the Decatur Book Festival, but at the time, no. Which would have been where they would have had the booths up, and they weren't just books. There were all kinds of vendors. There was jewelry and art. And does anyone remember the arts festival? That's what it was. And it was about 1991, 92. I know, back when the Stones were soft. And I lost an earring that my teenage children, or not even preteen children, had given to me. Something so ridiculous. They were huge peacock feather earrings. Look at me. But they're your kids. You put them on. You look ridiculous, and you put them on. So I'm walking around with these things, and one of them was lost. I thought, oh no, the little one had given it to me, so she's never going to forget. She's the one that once found a piece of art that I threw in the trash and came to me while I was in the bathroom. I had to find the earring. Some of you understand this because, I find it in Michael White's booth. He and his wife were there, and he was selling his art, which was very quirky. And had all kinds of dinosaurs and interest, and he really loved dinosaurs. A lot of punnery, and I loved puns. I loved puns. I fell in love with Shakespeare as a young woman because I loved puns. I did Lear at the Folger's Shakespeare Library, in part because of my great love of Shakespeare and because I love his wordplay. And so here's Michael, and he's got all this crazy punnery, and his wife, who was a great businesswoman, gave me the card, and I went back to my publishers, and I bought a piece. And I said, I want to work with this guy. I said, well, write a story. Just like that, write a story. You know better than that. My editor laughed about it. And then she said, well, let us get in touch with him, and we'll put him in our file, which was a physical file at the time. They would keep, but with illustrators of, contact information, sometimes art, in case something came up that fit the person. It really was like you had these marriage counselors. I mean, not the marriage counselor. I'm thinking of, not Yenta, because Yenta's the wrong word. Yenta's not actually a marriage a matchmaker, but a matchmaker. They're trying to figure out, and that's why the author doesn't choose the illustrator. It is really a high art to find a book or get a book, contract it, and then locate the right person. And we know when we'd read a picture book to a child, and you just know, you look at the art and you think, no one else could have done this. So they were just that wonderful. I loved working at Peachtree for many years, and still do sometimes. This book, it was Michael's third book. He did 2 books with them, and then they thought he was ready to do one more, and we had the most marvelous time. You're welcome to ask any questions about it because it would take too long. We had the most marvelous time. And the thing I would tell you about Michael White, there are a couple of other illustrators that say this, but no one more than Michael genuinely loved children. And as you get to Roald Dahl, I don't know how many of you know about his childhood. The more difficult the childhood of the children's book author, this is my own personal sort of assessment. I don't think I'm necessarily right, but it certainly seems to prove itself often. The more they seem to empathize with children and understand the world of the child. See, we're invited into the kingdom of childhood for a very brief time when we rear them or teach them or write for them. And if you don't respect the child, and I knew Mike did, I think every illustrator did, but Mike in particular. And he would call me every so often over the years and say, look, I know I'm not really famous and it doesn't matter because you know what? This life is like the best life in the world. Just thank you for dropping that earring that day in my, like I had anything to do with it other than finding the earring and handing a card over. But he loved it so. And he died right after the pandemic from something stupid, sumac infection, poison sumac. And he became septic, and over a year they treated him, and it got to his heart, and he died.
Because I have a Michael White story when you're.
I'll tell it.
Oh, no. Finish what you're going to say.
Tell it. Tell it.
Well, that's when I'm like, oh no. I was so upset when I heard he died. I didn't know he died, but I have a story about this book. Um, he and I were invited to go to a school in, oh gosh, it's South Georgia. It's near, where's Georgia Southern? My brain's dying. Anyhow, it was far away. It's hours away. So, yeah, Statesboro. It was near Statesboro. And so Michael and I went together in his little black car. And, we were together for hours. And we finally got to school. And I read my story, The Mightiest Heart, and had my kids crying. And the next room over, Michael was doing his stories. Kids were laughing. They loved him because he would draw the whole time. And I thought, that is so not fair. He gets to draw, and I have to, just tell my story, and it's a sad one. But yes, they loved him. You could tell he was
They
so
loved him
good.
because he loved them. And
Yeah,
a kid
he
can
was
smell a
great.
rat or a fake 1,000 miles away. If you don't like them, go into research. Say that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know what just happened. Oh, because he had so much fun with his puns, right? One of the things, if you go out there and you look through it, there are puns on every page, on little signs that he created. No, he couldn't go into the text, but nobody could stop him from putting signs in the illustrations. Oh, yes. Nearly everything has little signs on it. And they're so funny because a school asks for advertises for a librarian with a what is it, a fiery love of books, no, burning love of books, and a fiery love of children. So a dragon shows up. And so he has a dragon line, do not cross, across the books, which was how this book came to be, because I went to a library in South Georgia where a librarian had yellow tape, like crime scene tape she got from the cops, that she put around some of the books so that the littlest children wouldn't touch them. Awesome. And I told her, I said, you're a dragon. And she said, oh, I am. I'm a library dragon. This is a real person. Yes.
Oh my God.
And when she retired, God is my witness. When she retired, they called me and they said, this person is retiring. Would you come down? I said, sure. What do you want me to do? And she goes, we're not sure you do. I said, what do you want me to do? Would you pop out of a cake? And they had this huge cake made of cardboard and crepe paper. And they put it over me and I had to pop out. And it was the most ridiculous and just funny and wonderful thing. But she was a dragon. She was a dragon. So pencil and claw sharpener, the book stops here. Do not touch the books for display only. The Acme 5000 book detector. He just went crazy. And part of it was that playfulness. And I'm a full-grown adult. So are you. You're writing for adults. I have one chapter book, but you have moved into this wonderful world of adult fiction, young adult fiction.
No, it's
Adult
definitely
fiction.
adult.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, it's not X.
No,
X,
okay, not blue, but adult
Yeah.
fiction. And I have one chapter book that's middle grade.
Well, yeah, there are a few scenes.
But when you write for children, somehow you have kept some gossamer thread, some fiber that connects you to the child you once were.
Yeah, I will agree. I miss that because you have to consult that when you write a children's book. The whole time I was thinking of how
It's
I
what
felt about
didn't
things.
let you kill the dog.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Good point.
So those sensibilities really.
Yeah.
Oh, that's Michael. Maybe you want to bring that up? Mikey. Every school Michael White went to, he left art. He would create it there for the children and leave it to him.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's what I heard him laughing about next door.
So when you said these, I had to go run up to the office real quick. So he did a presentation. It's 2016, and this was his drawing pad. So he would send out these very elaborate envelopes that have all of these pictures drawn on them. I got one, and I don't know if he,
They were amazing.
yeah, and I don't know if he sent them out to like, okay, so if you have one and I have one, so at least he drew 3 of them for people in our library system. And he probably did this everywhere to let people know he had something new or he had some drawings to go. But as Carmen was saying, so he did this like little drawing. The session was called Drawing Dragons that he did. But, you know, and we are the official dragon lair in this particular building. But then all of his, as he was telling the kids, so this dragon was named Frostbite. So it's the dragon, and you see he has an ice cream cone, so Frostbite. And then this kind of speaks for itself. Hog Colin. Chicken noodle. But you know, I mean, his whole thing too is like telling kids, and there's like multiple ones because he would just like draw these as he spoke. But he had his airbrush, and he would tell the kids, you know, any material is used. You can use any material to make art. So this is the one that he gave me, and it used to hang in my office. But it is airbrush and marker, and he used whiteout to make the waves, just to illustrate that, you know, it doesn't matter what materials you have, you can use them to make art.
And he
Right.
told every child that every single one of them had an artist inside, just waiting for them to pick something up and create. It was, but it just was, I think, innate. He really loved kids and wanted them to, I hate to use the word empowered. No, I won't use it. I refuse. He wanted them to know that it didn't matter if they were just scratching with chalk on the side of the building.
Not storytelling, but just hang in there, take a little snooze. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Newbery Sisters Project, which some of you came to hear about, and I have my Newbery Sisters here. So we started to celebrate the Newbery winners from 1922 to 2022, and it was the brainchild of our neighbor, Deb Miller, who is a voracious reader, and she's a retired teacher from Winona Park Elementary School. And so the project is in conjunction with the Association of Library Services to Children, a division of the American Library Association, celebrating 100 years of the Newbery Awards to the author of the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children. And each one of those pieces is parsed out and described. What do we mean by distinguished? What do we mean by children? What do we mean by American literature or by American authors? So Deb invited Barb Kuhn, sitting next to her, who is from Kansas and also a retired first grade teacher. And she invited Liz Bracken, who was my friend, now living in Chattanooga, and a former student that I met 9 years ago at the first revival, Lost Southern Voices. And then she invited me also. So we joined her in reading the 100 Newbery books from 1922. Fortunately, some of us didn't start until 1929's book, so we're a little bit behind on that, but we're making up by reading the current ones. So Deb's shelves were already filled with all of these books because she's a book collector as well as reader. Barb had most of them or could go to her local library. Liz likes to shop at the used bookstores in Chattanooga. And I had some from my daughter's readings, and then I come to this library, and then I go to the Georgia State Library to the Carl Patton Children's Book Collection. So when I was teaching high school English many, many years ago, I read an essay that asked teachers how they enjoyed their book clubs. Did they answer a series of mimeographed questions? Did they write essays about the books? Did the host prepare a pop quiz? No, of course not. They enjoyed discussing the books, sharing their delights and their questions. So that's how we Newbery Sisters proceed. We read at our own pace, but typically the same book at the same time. We record comments and questions, reading select lines and paragraphs to one another on the Marco Polo app that can be listened to at any time. It doesn't have to be synchronous like a Zoom call. We fell quite naturally into using the now controversial Louise Cullen system from the Columbia University Teachers Reading and Writing Project to discuss the Newbery books in 3 distinct ways. And we don't say, okay, now what is your answer to this? It just happens very natural. So first is text to text. For example, the 1936 award, Caddy Woodlawn by Carolyn Brink, reminded us of the Little House on the Prairie books. The 1959 award, The Witch of the Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Spear, told the story of Arthur Miller's The Crucible. And we read 1949's King of the Wind by Marguerite Henry that followed Henry's Misty of Chincoteague and tells of the friendship between a mute stable boy in Morocco and a sultan's horse, thought to be of no use and bad luck, so that's why the stable boy gets to take care of it. Their travels across the desert to France, to England, and the horse, named Sham, meaning sunlight, becomes Godolphin Arabian, one of the 3 stallions that became the modern thoroughbreds. When we hear about Arabian horses, this was the story of the first Arabian horse that was raced. We read King of the Wind during the season of the Cripple Crown races, just as I was reading Horse, a novel by Geraldine Brooks. So all of this was coming together as good books do. The second category, text to self, generated lots of stories and reminiscences from each of us. The 1939's Roller Skates by Ruth Sawyer elicited stories of living in New York City. Onion John by Joseph Crumwald, 1960, got us speaking of the eccentric townspeople in each of our childhood neighborhoods and relating to the young protagonist, how we each found our own way in spite of parental or societal expectations. So text to text and text to self. And then the third category, text to world, was immensely powerful for me in the first Newbery book that I read together with my sisters, the 1929, The Trumpeter of Krakow by Eric Kelly, which opens, quote, "It was in the spring of the year 1241 that rumors began to travel along the high road from Kiev in the land of the Rus that the Tartars of the east were again upon the march. As the weeks went on, the rumors grew thicker, and there began to come through to Poland, our land of the fields, the news that the country lands of Ukraine were ablaze." We were reading The Trumpeter of Krakow in the late February 2022, just as Russia was invading Ukraine again. In thinking of text to world, we often discuss the language of the books, the treatments of the marginalized or subjugated people, the themes in relation to the era of the publication. Was the Revolutionary War novel Johnny Tremain, which I remember hating in 8th grade, 1944 by Esther Forbes, chosen 1944 to help young readers have a distant but needed perspective on World War II as it was being fought? Did the 1933 winner, Young Fu of the Upper Yangtze by Elizabeth Lewis, take readers away from the Great Depression to another part of the world to see how a young teen struggling with poverty, loneliness, and natural disaster uses his determination to survive and to thrive? Along the way, we're now reading Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim by Robert O'Brien, 1972. We're 50 years in, pretty good accomplishment, which called to mind the text-to-text connection of Dave Eggers' 2024 Newbery Award, The Eyes and the Impossible. We paused in our chronology to read The Eyes of the Impossible, and just now, the 2025 new Newbery, The First State of Being, the second Newbery winner by Erin Entrada Kelly. So we get to read her again when we come to that. Kara's books out, I'm going to say front because that sounds right, has brought many of the contemporary Newbery books for your purchase, but you'll have to go to the used bookstores or Deb's shelves to find the other ones. Let me pause to give just a bit of history as you review that list of winners, noting which ones seem familiar, and you say, oh yeah, I read that. Lost to the bookstore shelves, but not to our libraries, fortunately. To paraphrase P.L. Travers of Mary Poppins, she's a British author, so not eligible for the Newbery. She says, and this is a paraphrase, that which is lost is longing to be found. And these books, these voices that we celebrate, are waiting to be found and to be celebrated. The Newbery Medal was named for the 18th century British bookseller John Newbery, one R, I finally learned. Newbery, who is considered the father of children's literature, was an English publisher of books who first made children's literature a sustainable and profitable part of the literary market. 300 years after the Gutenberg Press made books possible, Newbery began publishing. His first children's book appeared in 1744. It was a very long title, A Little Pretty Pocket Book, intended for the instruction and amusement of little Master Tommy and pretty Miss Polly, with 2 letters from Drac the Giant Killer. Also, a ball and pin cushion, the use of which will infallibly make Tommy a good boy and Polly a good girl, to which is added a little songbook, being a new attempt to teach children the use of the English alphabet by way of diversion. Price, 6d, bound, all on the front page. So you had a whole story right there. I have a photocopy of it so you can see how that looks. Little rhymes, little C, great C, and then there's a little rhyme, and then little C, another little rhyme. Centuries later, in 1921, Frederick G. Melcher, who was an American publisher, a bookseller, an editor, and a major contributor to the library science field and book industry, proposed the Newbery Medal, quote, to encourage original creative work in the field of books for children, to emphasize to the public that contributions to the literature for children deserve similar recognition to poetry, plays, or novels, to give those librarians who make it their life work to serve children's reading interests an opportunity to encourage good writing in this field. So picking up the thread of illustrators of children's book, I mentioned the 1927 Newbery, Smokey the Cow Horse, which I meant to bring, but I forgot. Written and illustrated by William James. This is a book that I only recently realized was on the shelf of my childhood home, for my father had the second printing of this novel when he was a boy. I claimed it back from my brother in Michigan so I could admire these beautiful color illustrations from the 1920s. It was really wonderful. Miracles on Maple Hill by Virginia Sorensen, 1957, is illustrated by Joe and Beth Crush, who, wait for it, also illustrated Eudora Welty's only children's book, The Shoebird. I had to mention it. One of the Newbery sisters' favorites is the 1955 The Wheel on the School by Meinert de Jong. It's a favorite of Deb's because of the kind and wise teacher. And it's a favorite of Barb's because she saw stark nests in Europe. And for me, because it takes place in the Netherlands. And I grew up along the Hudson River that was settled by the German and the Dutch. And also because I went to college at Hope College in Holland, Michigan, where they have tulip time dancers in wooden shoes of the kind that Lena, the girl in the story, stares into her wooden shoe when she wants to think hard. The Wheel on the School is the 12th book that Maurice Sendak illustrated. Sendak is considered to be now among the leading children's book illustrator of our time. This led me to discover Sendak's first published illustrations. His high school teacher saw Sendak's doodled figures and asked him to illustrate a book that he was co-writing with a physics professor, Atomics for the Millions. It was a book for lay readers just after World War II ended with the deployment of the atomic bombs. You can look at this book, and I printed off a few illustrations, but you can look at it, library, Happy Trust illustrations of books. Atomics for the Millions. I actually understood Tesseract by looking at his illustration, which comes up, of course, in A Wrinkle of Time. The themes and the voices and the time and place of the Newbery books vary greatly, but we've noticed a few patterns. Older adults, relatives or not, are often the confidants and guides for the coming-of-age stories. Education is essential. Hard work, poverty, family issues such as absence of a parent or moving recur. And as with the oldest stories, such as Aesop's fables, some Newbery books are anthropomorphic, presenting the story through non-human characters. 1930s Kitty tells of her first 100 years. She's a doll. It was like a so-so book. I don't recommend it. Miss Hickory, 1947, is an acorn. Mrs. Frisbee, 1972, is a mouse. Death is another recurring theme of pets, of parents and elders, even of friends. This is addressed, and the young protagonist learn to accept death as a primarily natural occurrence, to grieve and to understand. Historic events are often the subject of the Newbery books, or in the case of science fiction, provide context. The 21 Balloons, 1948, is half true, writes the author William Penne Dubois, based on the sinking of the volcanic Pacific island of Krakatoa in 1883. One of the best known, still read, not lost Newbery books, A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle, 1963, was published during the Cold War era and the continued threats of atomic warfare. Remember the bomb shelters we were supposed to build or go into? It was rejected by 40-odd publishers, L'Engle said, because it was, quote, too difficult, and because it deals overtly with the problem of evil, and it was really difficult for children. And it was it a children's or an adult's book, by the way? Then this year, The First State of Being by Erin Entrada Kelly is also science fantasy, as it used to be called, science fiction about teleportation, but back to 1999 and the Y2K problem. In our Marco Polo discussions, we raise questions and we challenge the appropriateness of the books for contemporary readers. The language is often outdated. The racial, gender, and ethnic stereotypes might not be examined, and the subject of little interest. Daniel Boone by James Dougherty, 1940, is the only Newbery book currently out of print due to racism and the perpetuation rather than the interrogation of the stereotypes. Roller Skates by Ruth Sawyer, which I mentioned earlier, also delighted us, but it also gave us pause because the young protagonist discovers the murder of her adult friend at the hand of the woman's abusive husband, and she is counseled to lie about it to the authorities. All for a good cause, but we wonder about the ethics of this, the complicated choices offered to young Lucinda. While the book is a fictionalized year in the author's life and thereby based on reality, it did receive some criticism for the lack of proper supervision of Lucinda, of her strange assortment of friends, and her encounter with death. These are the same 19th, 20th, and 21st century criticisms of Huckleberry Finn. But what of the Southern aspect of Lost Voices among the Newbery books? The major publishing houses of all books, not just children's books, was in the Northeast, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, until 1977 when Peachtree Publishing was first established as a national publisher of children's books right here in Atlanta. Maybe that's why we have such marvelous children's book writers and adult book writers. The first Newbery, obviously Southern, was Strawberry Girl, also not lost necessarily, because it is written and illustrated by Lois Lenski, who wrote and illustrated nearly 100 books. Hard to get lost if you have that many books on your private shelf, including the Mr. Small series and the historical series, two of which won Newbery honors. Strawberry Girl is one of Lenski's regional books, in which she aimed to, quote, present vivid, sympathetic pictures of the real life of different kinds of Americans. The Boyer family moves from the Carolinas to the Florida backwoods, where they aim to grow and sell, guess what? Strawberries. They live among the Florida crackers, from whom Lenski gathered her material, for she lived in Florida. While her foreword explains the history and context of the story, I found the language and actions too stereotypical for 21st century. Regarding Biddy Boyer's dream of the big and ripe, juicy strawberries, her pa tells her, "Don't count your biddies for their hatch, young gallon." And white tablet paper tacked up on the outside wall of the Boyers' family cabin says, "We'll get you yet, just you wait," from the antagonist, the Slaters. However, I will say in defense, in 1946, Lenski's illustrations and her map of Florida showing where strawberries were first grown in the state, the understanding that come from the Boyers befriending the Slaters and showing them empathy, mean as they are, due to their impoverishment, add to the merit of the novel. I'll conclude with just a few thoughts about reading children's and young adult literature, connecting to the title of our panel, what we see when we read children's books. First is the premise that literature for children differs from literature for adults in degree, not in kind. Different in degree, maybe shorter, typically a single plot and cast of characters, a concentration on one theme or journey, but not different in kind. Well-written, vivid, dynamic characters, interiority that reveals unspoken thoughts and fears and hopes, dramatic actions that build to significant meaning. Second, we acknowledge that we are adults reading a book intended for children. And third, scholar Peter Hunt identifies several simultaneous ways that we as adults read children's books. Most important for the Newbery sisters are to read, quote, with an eye to discussing it with other adults, which we enjoy doing. And secondly, to surrender to the book on its own terms, reading as a child, which we do, but especially with books that we read as children or as young adults, but we try to think about the books as a child while we're reading it to discuss it with adults. With our adult eyes, we can see what might happen next. We can see the metaphors and the similes, but when we simultaneously read as a child, we retain the wonder and the beauty of the Newbery Award books. So that's my little teaching. It's just really marvelous to have friends that you read with. We all have book clubs probably, and it's a sense of accomplishment, but how many times these books really relate to us. But I'd like to open it up for you to have questions with each other or for the audience to have questions. Go away. Yes, Robin. Here comes a microphone.
I've had a career as a scientific writer. And so, my method is really linear and it's based on whatever the data is. But how much planning do you do? Do you have an outline? Do you know exactly where the story's going as you start? Is that different for every author? General question.
Thank you. Yeah. I think occasionally it could be different almost for every book, whether it's historical fiction, nonfiction, you're retelling a folktale. Folktale required for me, and I'd love for you to jump in, research with at least 3 sources from which then I will highlight, after I print them out, I'll highlight all of the places where the stories have the same incidents, meaning girl is sent to sick grandmother with basket. Here. Girl has cape. Oh, only one of the 3. Interesting. Mother says, do not go into woods. Here. Okay, that's not a wood. Doesn't want her to go into some, whatever, through the shortcut. And so after you pull those out for me, then you have the essence of the folktale. So it is very left-brained. It is very linear. Things like this book required a tremendous amount of, even though it was a current event at the time, roughly. I mean, I didn't write it when it happened. This is about 9/11. Nobody was writing about 9/11 when it happened. My husband is a musician, a Grammy. He wasn't writing. Nobody was. But about 5 years later, I took the folder that I had been saving for years that had the original New York Times article that I had found. It had pieces that I had put together through the years, sometimes on the back of a gas bill or something. And I'd stick it in there. Anything I had that I could find. And then came a lot of research into the Maasai, into not just the Maasai, historically the Maasai, in literature. By the time I had a first draft, for me, I talk about the story because it comes from an oral tradition. Then there's that point where I do sort of bullet points to get a spine on the story. It's like a body. It's very anatomical. After it has some structure, I can see, well, you can't get from here to here without adding a piece in. So you see all your, the places where you have, your plot holes. Then you fill in with descriptors. You fill in with names. Maybe you don't like that name and you change it. And then it gets very fat and it has to go on a diet. And you have to pull it in and remove the unnecessary. And at that point, for me, is when I need somebody that's not myopic, who isn't right here. That's where your editor comes in. So you turn it in, and then they say, oh, I love it, or I hate it, or you've got to work on it some more. And if they give you the contract, then that process begins again of winnowing, as it were. It's a great word. Winnowing. Makes you want to say it. Go ahead. See? Word people. You can't help it. Yeah. Because there's so much behind each book. It was fascinating to hear for, what are they, 32 pages? 30. Yeah, 48. I vaguely remember all this. But anyhow, you go through a lot just for 32 pages for a novel. That's why it takes me years. I'm always astounded by people who churn out a novel a year, or even some people do 2 novels a year. I think they have staff, frankly, and not even kidding, doing it for them, because it, think think about what all that she said, and I have to do that times 300 for each book. And when you were talking about all the drafts that you did, I do just as many. My editor doesn't even see it till my agent has gone through many drafts, and we have something to present to the editor for her to go through. And I do many drafts with her. And I say her. It's interesting. There's hardly any men in publishing. Yeah, they. So I don't outline, but I do have scraps of paper around, and a lot of it's just I carry it around in my brain, which is really not efficient at all. And that, I think that adds to how long it takes me to write something, because I'll think, where did I see this little factoid, and I have to figure out where I saw the
But don't you
little
feel
factoid.
like that the story is finding a way to articulate itself, and it is, I feel like it's almost like a computer that's going and moving and shuffling and saying, no, this goes first, no, this goes later, no, this goes, and then when you finally get it down, um, this one here, no, is that right? Yes, it was this book. I thought it was Yellow Star. Was I just couldn't, it was so muddled. I couldn't get it down. And I was awarded for a brief period the Carson McCullers Fellowship Grant in Columbus. So you got to stay in Carson McCullers' house, which sounds great. And someone who is not suspicious, however, not suspicious, listen to me, not superstitious, I got weirded out because I had a little terrier. This is going somewhere. And the dog got weirded out. We were there the first night, and he was this little fox terrier named George Bailey. And I hear him suddenly going, "Arr." And I was in the little dining room, and this, I mean, you felt like you were, it's her furniture, it's everything, it's you in her house. And I said, George, what's wrong? There's nobody there in the middle of the, and he's going, "Arr." And I said, oh, no, I'm sleeping in my car. Come on, George, we're going to the car. I didn't sleep in the car, but there was a more modern area in the back you could sleep in where they had added a room, and I ended up sleeping there, and which was ridiculous because I am probably the least superstitious person I know, and I was completely freaked out. And yet, when I went to bed, I said, listen, I promise to be very respectful. All right? Is this being recorded still? Oh, I'm not telling you this rest of the story. Get it. Go ahead.
Oh, you're gonna leave us like that?
No. Do we get any editing rights? Whatever. Okay, fine.
Well, you know,
Okay, fine. So,
Okay.
they're never going to give me another fellowship. So part of the thing is when something is freeze dried like that, it turns into a museum. But people still come in and clean, and they move. The place looked just like no one had lived there. So the next day, I spent the day. This is cleaning and rearranging furniture so it looked warm and comfy, and like someone was coming, and I. Writers are weird. We're weird people.
Okay.
Not scary weird, just generally odd. After it was all kind of done, I just said, does that feel better to you, Carson? Because it feels better to me. I sat down, and I know this was all a trick of my own mind. I do know that. I wrote the story in one sitting. That story had been driving me crazy. I couldn't get it down. I had a burglary, a burglary, robberies if you're home, burglary at our little tiny house while the girls and I were on vacation, and they had taken my only manuscript, only one I've been able to kind of manage to cobble together.
They took a manuscript?
They didn't know they were taking it. It was in my laptop bag with my laptop, and I'm the genius author that had one copy and all my research in one place.
Oh.
See, you asked the smart ones. Yeah, well, one of them.
Well, we were reminded in the previous session about Tina McElroy answered that thinking is writing. And so
It
just
is, that's what I
thinking
mean.
is writing. And so
I
that-
think that that's
Tommy's
what
to say that.
I think that's what happened. I don't think that suddenly Carson McCullers decided, I'm going to help you out, kid, because you're a mess.
Yeah.
But I think that all along there had been this process and that was trying to sort itself out, trying to find the story is trying to find its voice.
You know, this is sort of taking it in a slightly different direction, but I have to tell my ghost story with an
Oh,
author.
good.
Yeah, I have a book, Twain's Inn. It's about Mark Twain and really about him struggling with being Mark Twain as opposed to who he really was, Sam Clemens. He was trying to run from being Sam Clemens. And it's told from his secretary's point of view, because of course I always do it from a woman's point of view. But it ends up being very truthful about him and not always complimentary. In fact, Sam Clemens was a mess. And so I was invited to speak at his house in Hartford, Connecticut. It's as crazy as he is. It's wonderful, but insane, this house is. So I was getting ready to speak before this audience, and the power went out in the house. And they said they couldn't figure out what was going on, and they told me, you know what? You could look around. They gave me a flashlight. And they said you could look around the house. And so I decided to go up to his study because I had seen spaced up there. I had already visited when I was working on a book because, again, I go everywhere wherever I have a scene, I like to visit because I'm nuts and it's just fun. It's fun. It's fun. Anyhow, so I went up to the study after writing this book and having it published, and a lot of people being kind of upset with me for not doing this totally complimentary, Huck Finn-ish, actually Tom Sawyer-ish version of him. And I was in his office, all afraid, with the flashlight in the dark, thinking he's going to come after me, but he actually, I felt some real peace in there. It was fine. So I felt like, okay, he's not mad at me for telling the truth. And yeah, well, you know what? I actually,
People, that's anybody here not?
right. And I tried to show where his anger and flaws came from. Is actually really sympathetic if you look at it, from his childhood. So I felt like I felt forgiven,
But he still
yeah.
turned the lights out on you.
Yeah. Well, he got me up in his office, which sounds kind of bad, doesn't it?
And for the sake of the recording, Carson McCullers' home is not unkempt. They take very good care of it.
You
It's
should
just that
all
it felt
visit.
like a museum.
Well, it's just been repainted and everything, so you're good.
Another question or one or two, maybe? Anything else? Any comments? Yes.
Process of illustration. I always thought, as I looked at the book, illustration was the idea put on a piece of paper with lines and colors that the author is putting on with letters. And now you're telling me, I think, that they're two different things. So the idea that my first question when you first said it was, why would a publisher not want the illustrator and the author to talk? But what they're trying to do is say the same thing. But is that not? Help me. I don't want to get it wrong and go home with it wrong. I think it's because it's complicated because it isn't one answer. So the official position of most publishers is really simple. We want the illustrator to have greatest breadth of mental space to create whatever they feel that story needs. In other words, if they want to use pencil, if they want to use oils, if they want to present it with a very sort of garrulous, big baker, and that's how they see the baker, but maybe the author saw them as sort of this gaunt person who was kind of mean. So they want to give them that, that space. Also, if you have an author and an illustrator communicating, and for any reason they have a discussion that they can't get past, the publisher has to be the arbiter of that, and it can get really sticky, just icky sticky.
Yeah.
But
That's it.
if you have an illustrator and an author, both of whom are like, we like feedback. We're both happy to say no, thanks a lot, but I don't like that idea. Some publishers will now allow you to do that. I think the difference is crazy. It's so much better. At least every book that I have edited, where we have allowed, or it's been, or they wanted to collaborate. We also had really wonderful people. I think it just so it's a complicated metric, but you have people talking about the story. The illustrator is hearing, this is what I see. The illustrator can say, I see it differently. And at some point, it's going to go, okay, do you trust me now? And, you have to say, yeah, I do. I mean, you have to let go of it. Ultimately, the author has to let go,
Right. And if
no
you're,
matter which way you do it.
so that was my question. I mean, what if she does an illustration and you're thinking, this is not my book? You just say, tough luck
That's
to me.
rare. I mean, it would have to be something so egregious. You don't always have to like the illustrations. I like most of them. I have 17 books. And I don't dislike any of them, but there are some I love more.
Yeah, they are a surprise. Pearl pointed out early on, ask if it's a surprise when you got your art. And yes, it's a big surprise, very big. And you have to make an adjustment each time because they are so different than what you pictured. Nothing is ever like what you pictured. But it's generally you come around to that. And I always sit back and think, I have no training in art. And you could see their work, you could see their talent, and that's exciting. So you get over it being not what you thought of. Thank you.
Lensky, who's both writing the book and illustrating it, or Will
Yeah.
James for Smokey, writing it and painting the paintings that
And
become the
that's a
illustrator.
whole different thing.
Yeah.
It really is than when you're a writer.
When my wife, who's over there, and I, when our youngest daughter was with us as a child, we started a habit of reading, as many parents do. When she was a little child, it was easy, because it was a bedtime ritual. But even when she was well into high school, we still read, and we still had schedules that could manage to do that. We read Rembrandt's Daughter aloud as a family. We did. It was a lovely experience
Thank you.
together.
That's lovely.
But so with children's books with pictures, you would think that. But do you intentionally write for the ear and the tongue when you write? I mean, and how do you do that? Because I also write. I write academic, mostly books, articles and things. And sometimes I think about that differently. But in writing fiction or writing this sort of literature with children, where the likelihood of it being read is pretty high. I mean, you ever think about how the tongue feels with the words that you put on the page, or how it hits the ear?
You want me to go ahead? Okay. Well, I actually, when I'm doing adult books, I don't say them aloud, and I don't think that. But I wish I could remember is it Updike? One of these guys from that era said he knows a book is taking off when he hears its music, and you have to be a writer to kind of understand that, because you'll be writing along and it's just not taking off. It's just not taking off, and all of a sudden you hear its music. You know what I mean? It's sort of a magical thing, and you can't make it happen. And I know from my novels, like I could write 100 pages and not hear that music. And I know I haven't. I would never turn in that because I know it's not right. You have to hear the music. So there's something to that. And my sister and I, we have an aunt who was a composer, and I feel like we have like I can see that it's in the genes, because it is, you feel this music as you write. it's kind of mystical in a way.
That is true, and especially what you're right talking about, I think, and I would agree. But I also would say then there's the pragmatic side, or in children's books, they were specifically written with all kinds of rhythms that are time tested. You have the cumulative story. This is the house that Jack built. This is the rat that ate that, and it's cumulative, and at the end you go backwards. Then you have the circular story. If you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk. If he has a glass of milk, and what do you go back to the end? And then you gave the mouse a cookie, and because you gave the mouse a cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk. There are a number of story structures that are rhythmic, so that's true, and have a form of music to them, and that's different than just knowing that the story has reached. I don't know. My husband calls it the zone. It's when you're in that place and you suddenly, we've all had it. At some point, everyone in this room has had a moment when you had an idea that you knew was some sort of inspiration. I mean, did you write it down? Probably not, right? Sometimes, yeah. I rarely do. Now more so, but
That being a storyteller and already oralizing these books.
yes, and I
That's
don't, I
to-
fight that. I don't want to have the oral intrude on the written. And it's like, it's a losing battle.
Because when we read your books, we try to put the sound back in.
Yes, and so I want you to read out loud. But there's a point where a child may read it on their own, whether they began the book with an adult or they just entered into it on their own. They're going to read on their own. But especially if it's read for children, in my head, I hear the voices, and I hope that the adults will take every license possible to give the characters voices, to go up, to go down, to slowly turn, or go really quickly. And all those things are such easy techniques.
Some children now are actually learning how to read that way. My granddaughter just said, "Can I read with voices?" I said, "Okay, yes."
I am
And
doing a video
another
for
one said, "Well, this has an exclamation point, so I need to do it bigger." And that is going to, how we read with both our minds, our hearts, certainly, with our eyes, and also with our ears, that sort of synchronicity of all of our senses. So
That's why I say it's mystical or magical or whatever. You can't make it all happen. It happens organically. You can't force it.
even when you're
Yeah.
working within a structure. I have one I'm working with a structure right now. It is so much fun to tell. When I tell it, these little children are, and they're like, "I love that story." I am writing crap right now. I have written that thing over and over and over, and I have the structure, and it is so dumb, waiting for that thing to happen. And there's a point at which I'll probably be driving.
Not just kids that love it.
No,
Parents
I
who
think
read it
it's the
over and
artist's
over again.
way,
It's
so to
clever.
speak.
It works on that level with us too.
well, thank you so much, Lynn and Carmen, for letting
This
us
was
into
my
your
first
world.
library, So it's good.
letting us into the world of writing and illustrations and the collaborations and how we enjoy books and revive lost voices. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.